Hello and welcome to State of the Economy. Today we have with us President of the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry, FICCI, Mr. Sidharth Birla, who will speak to us about how businesses are feeling after, well, more than 100 days of this government. Welcome to our show, Mr. Birla.
Thank you.
So how is, we had interviewed you 100 days before this government came, and you had outlined a set of issues. Do you think those issues are getting sorted out now? Although I would concede that 120 days is not adequate, but do you see beginnings of green shoot?
Vinoji, when we met last, and even by that time there was some excitement in the stock market, even before the new government had been formed. So let me divide the euphoria in two parts. One is the stock market euphoria. I won't spend time on it. It is a lot of pent-up demand, and there is a lot of feel-good factor and positive sentiment. So let's put that on the side.
Some feel that stock market is maybe running way ahead of fundamentals.
I think it is. I personally think it is, because the kind of multiples that you're seeing in the stock market will not be reflected in the bottom lines, at least in this year. At least in this year.
Because so let's discuss,
So now let's discuss the real economy.
Real economy.
In the real economy, I think basically the mood is one of confidence. The mood is one of looking at reviving investments that people had put away into the shelves. The question is, if I am looking at reviving an investment today, it will still take time by the time the actual checks are cut out, because of two reasons. One is that, yes, growth is again taking an upward path, which was again as expected, because even whether it was the earlier government or whether it was the economic survey, we saw 5.4 to 5.9 kind of estimates, which were over last year's 4 point something. So we seem to be heading that way. FICCI's own survey of economists show that we might be headed towards 5.6. My own personal estimate, not a FICCI estimate, is that we might cross that numbers by the end of the year.
Closer to 6% GDP.
It could be closer to 6%. However, almost all balance sheets have been really battered. So despite a willingness to invest, the reality of whether you can raise the capital as well as the loans to invest is going to take some time. And is going to take some time, because almost no company is today left with the flexibility of either simply just going and floating capital, or whether the promoters have enough money to put in the promoter share, etc. But certainly investment talk is back on the agenda. Now let us look at the practicality, how it pans out. The second part is, in terms of investments, how the existing investments which were on the ground, whether in the private sector, whether in the public sector, but for want of regulatory and other permissions, how that pans out and how quickly they are put back in order. Now,
in this regard, the previous finance minister, UPA, if you remember, had announced that he had cleared 6 lakh crore worth of investments at the cabinet level, some 300 projects. Now, are those investments fructifying?
I think they were on the way, but even, you see, in the earlier government, we used to have weekly outputs of, this is the amount cleared and that is the amount cleared. Now, I don't have hard, reliable data to say how much of that amount is actually being spent. Because perhaps those project numbers also needed to be reworked. I mean, the financial needed to be reworked. I don't know. But certainly, we do not have any hard, reliable data to say that these are the projects that have been cleared since this government came in. But the sense one gets, one runs into people who are in the PMG, one runs into people who are dealing with the PMG. The sense one gets is that it is in hyperactive mode. And therefore, perhaps, I think this government has taken a conservative approach of really talking when things happen. Otherwise, the information is not freely available. So
are you seeing clearances at the Environment Ministry, etc., land
we are getting the sense.
All those problems which existed?
We are getting the sense, because, suddenly you don't find people cribbing about it. I mean, that's if a child stops crying, his stomach should be full. So you don't hear the cribs that one would hear earlier. Now, how much of that translates into the rupees and annas, we have to see.
But I'm also hearing, you're right, business is not cribbing. But I'm also hearing some incipient, if you please, some minor crib that things are not moving at the pace that they had thought. Is that your sense also?
I think, the car has been put into a very strong first gear. But really speaking, we'll cruise at 100 kilometers by the time we come down to the third or fourth gear, right? So 120 days. And plus, let us not forget that a lot of share of mind in this 120 days has gone towards sorting out the administrative mechanisms, creating the administrative structures. That takes time. It can't be done overnight.
PMO is functioning
Because the cabinet ministers may work at a very high speed. If you remember, it was on your show that I had first probably propagated that we believe that this GOM culture should be done away with, and the accountability should go back to the cabinet. And that is one of the first things that we saw happening. Okay. But now to announce that as a policy and to actually bring the whole thing into practice does take time. Secondly, we did have moments of anxiety. Let's say because of weekly announcements in the media of how much the monsoon is deficient, is it not? So, you sort of created a psychosis of shortages.
That is behind us,
It's behind us, but it's part of the 120 days. It's part of the 120 days. And therefore, let's take that into account and, give the devil his due. And happily, despite all those problems, I think inflation did not rear its head as much as, for example, I would have expected it to. So I think that has been under control, and I think that's a wonderful achievement.
I remember, Mr. Birla, we had also discussed in our previous interview the relationship between various institutions, and you had said, very specifically I remember, that the new government would need to sort out the distrust, if you please, between, or mistrust between various institutions. The executive was not the only institution which needed to get active to push for growth, push for or to push reforms, necessary reforms. Judiciary, investigation agencies, CBI. Now, do you see the trust in the relationship between these institutions or the equilibrium between these institutions getting restored, or do you? Because I personally find that if you take the coal issue, the government has gone and told the Supreme Court that you can free to cancel all the over 218 coal blocks. CBI has been filing all kinds of cases. NDA is reviving its own 12-year-old case under NDA of some disinvestment. Now, I'm a bit puzzled. Where do you think this is headed? One thought that we would be over these problems.
I think a lot does need to be done in this area. And as you said, I'm not getting into the investigative agencies and all. We believe that there are four corners, which is the government, the judiciary, the industry or the business per se, and the civil society.
Yes, sure.
And I think we need a better coordination between these and some kind of code of conduct. I mean, not a written code of conduct, but a sort of an ethos to evolve. The biggest problem which hasn't really gone away, I mean, it has probably reduced. And I would also not say that the government is triggering these.
No, it's not the government.
No, it's not.
But
I think there is an
it's
Indian...
how other institutions respond to the government.
It is an Indian propensity to suddenly go back and say, and I think I mentioned to you exactly this, that, we can never replicate the urgency of an item, the exact situation as it had was at a point of time. So later on, even 3 months later on, a decision looks wrong, but it's not wrong. It was the right decision. So I think one of the issues is that as a society, we must move towards a statute of limitations, because you can't suddenly go back and question things that happen in 47 or 49 or something, unless there is irrefutable evidence which is presented. We cannot have fishing expeditions. And I think this is, again, probably has the potential to again derail decision making, whether in corporates, whether in public life, whether in the bureaucracy. It has the potential to derail that.
It has.
So I think this item needs to be flagged. And informally, I can tell you that FICCI has also made this suggestion recently to the government. It's an Indian propensity, so I think we need to address it in an Indian way.
Because I don't know if I'm correctly reading this. Mr. Modi is trying to make the government machinery more efficient by giving a lot of responsibility to the secretaries, right? I mean, your businesses would be seeing this from very close quarters. And he's calling the secretaries to give him presentations. He's calling them to determine progress made or not made. At the same time, we had the spectacle of the Attorney General going to the Supreme Court and requesting the Supreme Court to reverse their earlier order, which gave CBI, for instance, free hand to investigate officers, bureaucrats, without seeking the permission of the political authority. So now this was part of the CBI autonomy debate which happened in the previous government, and everybody supported it, even BJP supported it. So now we are witnessing a different kind of spectacle where the investigation agencies themselves are coming under a sort of cloud. So these are all issues which actually need to be sorted out in creating efficiency in the system, isn't it?
I think, it's there are too many things happening, and therefore I think it's unfair to maybe comment on each one of them. But by and large, I mean, for example, the secretaries, as you say, the secretaries are, there's a lot of conversation that is there too much control or whatever. I think the fundamental thing that is being promoted by this government, and particularly starting at the top, is accountability. So, people are understanding, people are discussing, people are taking decisions, but I think accountability is going to be there. So, many of these things are going to sort of self-repair themselves in a culture of accountability. And this accountability needs to flow not just in government, it needs to flow to business, it needs to flow to society also, because, I mean, everybody has a responsibility. And it needs to flow to the lowest entrepreneur, because many times it's the people down below who also prefer speed over accountability. And therefore, I think this needs to be sorted out as a country.
And in regard to investments, you're saying balance sheets still need to repair. Now, is it at the big business level, medium, or small businesses? What?
I think, the sense we get, I don't have, again, hard data to back this up, and almost nobody will say that I'm strained. But I would think that particularly small businesses on the smaller side of the scale have been hit hard, partly because of liquidity constraints for them, because the question is whether a bank is ready to loan them, whether their whole business is running. Because if, for example, let's take the auto ancillaries. There's a small auto ancillary and the auto sector itself is running under capacity. They come under huge strain. So and secondly, I think the company law also has created more problems for a smaller person to borrow money, to move money even between their own family. And
so there's still a whole lot of regulations which need to be relooked at, right?
They need to be relooked at. And with a particular focus in mind that, and I think it's much better.
Making things easy for businesses.
I think it's much better to solve problems for 10,000 entrepreneurs than for 2 large companies, because 2 large company problems you can solve in 2 days.
That's a very interesting point.
But the 10,000 small people, it's going to take some months.
Sure. And
so I think we need to speed that up.
Sure. We'll take a small break here. Please don't go away and keep watching RSTV. Welcome back to State of the Economy. We are having a conversation with the President of FICCI, Mr. Sidharth Birla. Mr. Birla, you said something which struck me as very important, which is it's much better to impact 10,000 small entrepreneurs than focus on 1 or 2 big ones who in any case have the capability to repair themselves or repair their balance sheets, right? Now, where does FICCI stand in this big debate which is going on about India's banking sector reeling under some 10%, not exactly non-performing assets, but 10% strained assets, which include assets which are restructured, which are as good as stressed. Now, that's a huge amount, and a lot of them in infrastructure sector. You had some ideas, I remember, before this government came into place, about how to deal with this strained infrastructure assets or bank loans sitting in balance sheets of companies, and how they can be repaired, because infrastructure is needed. It's not for want of demand. The supply is there to be made,
I think first let me take 30 seconds on the generic problem, because the banks have 2 issues. One is, out of the loans existing that they have given out, they are stressed, whether to 8%, 10%, I don't know, in terms of stressed assets. NPAs may be less. And the second issue is that the banks themselves have a capital requirement, because if we want the economy to grow, the banks are going to be a very important source. So, for example, 4 to 5 lakh crores is the kind of capitalization that the banks need. Now, certain things can be done politically
Over the next 5 years.
over the next 5 years, and the sooner the better. And right now, the capital markets are in good shape, so perhaps it's a good time to raise capital. Then there can be some difference of opinion. For example, FICCI suggested that why doesn't government holding come down to 26% and keep a golden share for control, which, by the way, was reflected also by the Nayak committee report. They also never spoke of a golden share. But at the same time, I think the government has indicated that they would like at this point of time to come down to 51% and not less, which is perfectly okay because it's a call for a government of the day to take. We can make suggestions, but if that is a philosophy, fine. But the fact remains that the banks need capital. Now, on the other side, on the asset side of the banks, when we come to the stressed assets, let me describe it in 2 or 3 ways, 2 or 3 definitions, which FICCI has already gone public with. See, one is the very early stage of a problem where a business is running, it is able to pay all its bills, it's able to pay its suppliers, it's able to pay everything. He is not able to pay maybe the interest and certainly not the principal on the loan. In effect, it means that the business model of the company is not impacted or damaged. They need hand-holding to get over. So that is a fairly simple one. Some of it can be taken care of even outside the CDR mechanism, which can be through restructuring, but it has to be practical restructuring. Because earlier, people don't want to acknowledge a problem. I think the whole thing is in the mindset that we must acknowledge the potentiality of a problem, but we are not prepared to accept that. I'd much rather look at you after you're damaged. So if you have a cold, I should give you a cough medicine today rather than give you antibiotics tomorrow. So I think it's a question of mental acceptance by the corporates as well as the banks to have an open dialogue to catch the problem before it occurs. The second level is where the company has been bleeding for some time, and therefore it's eroding working capital, etc., and therefore
its basic business model is flawed.
Business not flawed, it's got damaged. Maybe because of underutilized. Maybe somebody put in 100 crores today and the market didn't pick up. So it's not even the business model is flawed. It's just a question of bad timing. Okay, so he can get damaged. Again, there we might need a little more surgery, which means like infusion of capital. It could mean possibly on an understanding between the lender and the borrower as well as the shareholders, maybe some kind of management improvement, management change, but not in an adverse way. And the third category is that of a willful defaulter, where people have come and asked FICCI that, why are you not speaking against a willful defaulter? I mean, for example, now
that's because there's a history to this. We don't have a history of people being declared willful defaulter at all. So people,
then why have
one view is that there can't be a case that there was no willful defaulter.
My limited point is, if we have a regulation, let us be clear about how it is to be applied. Otherwise, it is a meaningful regulation and let us get rid of it. We can't have it both ways. For example, people said that, XYZ is a defaulter, how come you never said anything about it? I said, look, if he's a defaulter, the bank is the first one to know he's a defaulter, a willful defaulter. I'm talking willful defaulter.
Yeah, willful.
But if in 6 or 8 months or 12 months, the bank does not declare him a willful defaulter and therefore take access to whatever SARFAESI Act or whatever they have, who is FICCI to say that, Sidharth Birla or Mr. Venu is a willful defaulter? I can't say this.
Yeah, sure.
The bank has the power. So let us be very clear that if there is a willful default, either let us apply it or let us get rid of it. But the fact remains that we need early attention. And I think this mental acceptance is still not there between the borrower and lender, because either the borrower is not forthcoming or the lender is not forthcoming. Much of the problems have occurred because of the tenure of loans. Now we've done away with DFIs. So we are having 5-year loan tenures. So if you want the money, you are willy-nilly going to justify how you're going to get the money. But probably in the second year, you realize I can't pay this in 5 years. So in the 5th year, it's going to become an NPA or a stressed asset or something like that. What FICCI had made the suggestion is that for a national asset management company, which would effectively be government sponsored but free of government capital. So the government would not free up this thing. Maybe through these REITs and other things, we could create a structure where we could get genuine long-term capital from long-term sources, whether from insurance.
Is that happening now? I mean, is that suggestion?
I think it's being actively considered by Reserve Bank as well as the banking department. Now the question is, I think they have to make up their minds how they will manage it.
Recently, Reserve Bank governor made a very strong statement suggesting that promoters should not think that they have a birthright to run their companies. It was almost as if suggesting that there are a lot of Indian promoters who do think that it's a birthright to run their companies. Even after their defaults, they get restructured, they get bailed out, kid glove treatment by banks, because of their connections with the politicians. Is that a problem?
No, I am not going to what
And
may
he even
be or
spoke
may
about
not be.
crony capitalism. Governor Rajan was spoke
Yes.
about crony capitalism.
I think FICCI is absolutely against crony capitalism. We need a level playing field. We need to encourage as many people as we can. So if we have policy-driven and technology intervention in decision making, it's perfectly happy. There can be 20 ways whether to
I think we
offshore.
need some cronyism now with those 10,000 small entrepreneurs. We've had enough cronyism with the big ones.
I think we need to look at those the problems of the small industry. But
So should we have crony small capitalists? Crony small capitalism.
I don't think I will ever agree to the word crony, but I think genuine problems need to be looked at. But to come back very quickly to one point that you made about Governor Rajan, yes, I think it is for the lender to take a professional call. It is not to say that a promoter has a birthright, but the promoter should not feel he has a birthright. But at the same time, I think the whole system has to be reasonably sensitive to the ownership rights of a promoter. You can't simply say that because you're a promoter, I distrust you or you're bad. Because you have to look at the quality of management. If this promoter, despite problems, is capable of bringing a quality management which can be professionally assessed, I don't think there should be a bar just because he is a promoter.
That is true.
At the same time, if the promoter, this is what I was talking of the second level of companies, that there has to be greater interaction and greater understanding of how do you resolve, because ultimately you're killing value for the country.
Sure.
Let's for a moment forget the promoter, shareholder, lender, somebody's picking up the bill.
Well, yeah, sure.
And this country cannot afford to leave
But here, Mr.
unplayed.
Birla, here the problem is there has never been a history of examples being set in this country. Like, if some bank did indeed give kid glove treatment to some promoters, which happens in our system, but there's never been. That's what probably prompts Governor Rajan to say, talk about crony capitalism. Maybe we need to find a solution to this, of course, and maybe what you said.
It's I think this it'll take a few years for this jugaad mindset to go. This jugaad mindset is what leads to crony capitalism, what leads to,
And I completely take your point that small entrepreneurs need to be
nurtured.
nurtured.
Yeah.
That's why I said that there could be some cronyism be shown to small entrepreneurs.
You see,
at least you widen the base of the economy.
I think the system never shows cronyism. So I'm averse to the word crony, but the system has to show some deference, if I can use the word, to the small people.
Yeah, that's a better term. Yeah.
Better term.
More polite. Okay, now coming to macroeconomics. We have this inflation, wholesale price index down to 3.5. The trend is clearly downwards. Consumer price index is downward. Why is RBI not cutting interest rates? What is your sense?
I think
what is RBI waiting for?
You see, it's a big debate. Industry always says to RBI, how is interest rates going to damage? How is it going to control inflation? I think
I'll tell you why I'm asking this.
Yeah.
Initially, Raghuram Rajan was saying that the fisc if the government fixes the fisc, I'll create. Now the fix is getting self-repaired because oil prices are down to $97 a barrel, and it's lo and behold, the entire oil subsidy problem is over. If you just look at the numbers.
In reality,
it's over, right?
Yeah.
And you may do better than the fiscal deficit figures for this year. So Arun Jaitley is probably a very lucky finance minister. So given this scenario, the FIS getting self-corrected, don't you think interest rate cut is valid?
Again, if I was to advocate interest rate reduction, I'd be the first one to advocate an interest rate reduction based on the fact that in the middle of the year we see these things happening. But I'm just giving the other side of the coin, but I'm not defending high interest rates because high interest rates are dampening investment. I think Governor Rajan is looking for sustainability of inflation control, sustainability of controlling the fiscal deficit, because really speaking, much of the very much discussed subsidy programs like the food subsidy and all are yet to take off. So I think really speaking, and I think Governor Rajan would also be guided by a lot by the Reserve Bank policy and the research.
Tell me, what interest rate does a small businessman pay for a loan? 14%, 15%?
More.
16, 17%?
I mean, let's put it this way, that I know of large companies which have got impacted, so therefore they made some losses. 16% is easy. And if a small person wants to go and borrow money, probably would pay more. Not only to the banks or even if you
And
borrow from...
tell me, Mr. Birla, frankly tell me, a small entrepreneur in India paying 17%, in Japan paying 1%, in the US paying 2%, in Europe paying 2%, how do you compete?
You see, it is a problem because, let us not compare our interest rate with Japan's interest rate because their interest rate has different components to it. Our interest rate has different...
In a globalized scenario, you are competing, right?
Theoretically, we pay very high energy costs. Yeah. We pay very high infrastructure costs. We pay very high...
That's what makes us uncompetitive, right?
This is what makes us uncompetitive.
And interest costs also.
And interest cost adds to that, certainly. And therefore, in some ways, you have less left over to pay for your raw materials and stuff. You also have left for the entrepreneur to take the risk because the risk return ratio is not as good here as it is, say, in America. Now, you can attribute that to interest rates, you can attribute that to better competitiveness, etc. But
I agree with you. I think the main worry is small entrepreneur who form the backbone of the economy. Thank you very much for talking to us, Mr. Sidharth Birla.
Thank you.
That's all we have in this edition of State of the Economy. We'll be back with you next week. Thanks for watching.